Okay, I'm now going to enter into what was the Roman Agora, or the center of the Roman Greece, or at least of Athens. And you have to remember that Rome idolized the art and the architecture of Greece. And so what we see reflected here are probably Greece architecture in the form of this, I think, the lowest level, or at least the first level, Ionic. It's very simple, no base at all except for the stone base, but no actual particular base. And they're very simple top to it. From the inside, we can kind of try to begin to imagine how impressive this was designed to look. Probably more columns like that, excuse me, and probably maybe even covered, but a propylon, very much like we saw in the Acropolis. And after looking at so much stone lying on the ground that we can't decipher, the only thing you can do is look for the novel. Now here's the novel. These little circles and this cutout right here. What were they probably for? Probably to provide a lock, if you will, for the stone above them. But this almost looks like dominoes, doesn't it? Now as I turn around, we could again only begin to imagine, but columns immediately in front of us, 4. And did these columns extend further to the right, or was somehow this the limit of a long building? But look at that set of columns down there, as well as all along this side. And we'll go see the interpretive sign and learn more than just my ramblings. It's always fun to take a look at these lapidariums. In other words, places where they store, not necessarily for exhibit, but the pieces that they might use in the future, that they might use to reconstruct. Notice this, the corner of a pediment, and over there it looks like some kind of basin. And notice there at the bottom of that column, you can see how it's been roughly worked just to excavate out a thin little area that would have sat on top of a little knob on a pedestal that would have helped to kind of keep it in place. One of my few opportunities to actually get a butterfly that's lighted on this trip. Here a reconstructed drawing of what the Agora might have looked like in the day. I don't know where it was that or where we are standing now. It doesn't say. I'm guessing that this was the stoa over here, and I'll show you that in a moment. And then, so here's where I think that stoa is, that long line of columns, and then the other line of columns is right there. That's that, what would be a building there, I'm guessing. I'm guessing on this diagram, this is where we entered, but I can't see how to correlate this with the drawing that you just saw. What we saw is the Gate of Athena, donated by Augustus and Julius Caesar. So just shortly before the flip of the millenniums, i.e. 19 to 11 BC. Apparently I've misinterpreted all of this. The area that we're in now is just that square there. So it does correlate to here. Here's where we entered, and here's the big square, which is the Agora. So, in that basis, it would seem like all the columns we're looking at were just sides of the original Agora. And we're looking at one alongside, and then part of the short side. So, way off to our left somewhere, the original Roman Agora extended. Interesting here to see these two circles. What do they represent? Probably something less than 2,000 years. Were these benches? It would have been the long line of columns, very much like we saw at the Stoa in the Greek, or excuse me, the Athens Agora earlier. Notice there were at least 2 rows, an outer row of columns and an inner row of columns, apparently. Notice the drainage. Just I'm pointing out the things that, if you've watched my videos, are obvious to you without my explanation, but I have nothing else to talk about. Remains of a sarcophagus. Isn't this pathetically ironic that the beautifully scrolled flower wreaths there are almost totally muted, and they're apparently a pillow for his head, or her head. They were short people. And how old are these adjacent buildings? And is the height between here and the road up there original? Were these walls original? Here it says there's a fountain, so somewhere in here was a water source. There perhaps. So it might have filled that up with a bath. And with these, these would have had 4 separate fountains coming out, and over time would have worn down those holes that you see. Isn't that interesting? And notice that notch over there. Could there have been some kind of bench there? And therefore excess water to flow out the bottom, perhaps to keep a continuous flow and a circulation so the water was always as natural as it could be. Those square holes perhaps new just for water drainage when that looks like a new wall. That doesn't, and if this were built into a hillside, or cut away if you will, then the Romans would have built a supporting wall like this, and this may well be it. But what did these stand for? Were they wells or cisterns? Some of these pillars or columns are drums, in other words sections, whereas others appear to be one single unit. Will 3D printing someday be used to put these original pieces back on their columns and then fill in with the 3D printer the original design of stone so that they look almost pristine? This is a little bit more elaborate base than the ones that are behind me in place. Looks like an intentional drainage system. Is it Roman? Seems to be, that carving of the rock there. I'm always impressed too with their surfacing of large stones. I've seen that in many places. Often cannibalized though for other later projects. Here I pan across this corner of columns in the hopes that some of the people watching this, including myself, can get some sense of the magnitude of this building. It was huge. This is interesting. It looks like wash basins. Those crenellations remind me of what you see just under the lip of a overhanging roof. Somebody knows what this is. Could it simply be drainage from the top? Here I'm about to enter another, what I think is a propylon. Somewhat complete, actually. Just the notches up there that perhaps hold wood beams, cross beams. Look at this lovely kind of a column. Almost a figure 8 column, for lack of a better word to call it. Holes in the front across the face of it represented something would have been cantilevered out to where I'm at, maybe all the way out to the stoa. These square holes that tell us other kinds of vertical beams were placed here and secured. It looks rather roughly hacked out as a way of moving water. In fact, it terminates there as though that was all reconstructed. As we continue through this propylon, 4 massive columns. Wonder how high they would have gone up, given their thickness quite a distance. Certainly an attempt by the Romans to emulate, if not surpass, the Greeks' Acropolis propylon. Here another building we enter into. I mean by these crenellations, now here it's shown pointing up. Maybe that's the case, but I think they usually pointed down. But I would really have a clue what usual means. It's just interesting to look at these pieces and wonder what they're for. Why was it necessary to carve a hole all the way through that block? And you can see the two squares on the side indicating something else was locked in there. But could the beam have been, or the column have been so huge that it needed that stabilization? And same with this thing here. That's a lot of work to create that particular stone. But this one almost like half a donut. Here another panning view. And even where I'm at, there are columns suggesting this was an important part or detail of this overall structure. Notice up there on the top of those columns we get a little hint of what the inside lintels would have looked like. But at the highest level of all of this is this entryway. Why are these so black? Here, stone just stacked, possible for future use. Notice by taking those individual pieces that have detail and maybe assembling several of them, you can begin to extrapolate what the entire piece looked like. And with computer graphics, you can recreate it in total, and then with some kind of automated machinery, you can duplicate it. And this large circle perhaps held, and another one next to it perhaps held two very big columns. Drama to this otherwise flat face. This is probably some kind of sacrificial stone seen in so many cultures. Sacrifice made on there. The design probably has some significance. You notice where fluids can drain off of it. And I think this is an old structure, but I don't know what it was. I've read about it. There's a pretty artifact. You wonder if it was Greek that the Romans incorporated. And here are the remains of a well or a cistern, perhaps, maybe even though a post hole for a column. It's the Muslim hammam or bathhouse, which I wish we could get into. I'd love to see those. Okay, you got to see this. These are the public latrines. So just imagine men my age would have absolutely known where these things were and what the hours were and how you got in and out of them, and also whether they charged. So I was wondering, is this trench here a drainage trench? Looks like down in there might have been, I was going to say mosaics, but I can't really see them. But you can tell that there were 4 columns there, one for each corner. Here's what it looked like. You can see that we saw one of the columns, and notice that it was at that time standing with those kind of supports. Now whether that drawing represents that there was a vacant spot underneath there for decomposition or for drainage, I don't know. And those dots you see are not decorations, they're the toilet holes. So this would be about a 40-holer, big time in anybody's record book. Yes, this was a drainage channel, they just had a lot of water flushing through it. The problem with these drawings is there's a disconnect between the two of them. You can't connect what is which. Where are the holes in the drawing to the left? It's possible that that inner line that we partially see there is that. But here's another column with some kind of lettering on it. Looks Greek. And another with a pretty vase relief. Now to get a closer look at these beams that ran across the columns, we can also see the tops of the columns here. Was that an old bench or some other architectural device? Love butterflies. How can you not? Maybe this was a stele. All of these have writing on them. The middle one, obviously, for catching water and letting it continue to run off, maybe a juncture in the water system. Same thing with this one. Adventure. Imagine this underneath the Acropolis. What a poignant position for it to take. Okay, I'm now outside the actual Roman Agora archaeological site and across the street from the hammam under restoration, looking at the chunk of, this is most of the northeast corner of the large building we were looking at. Probably over there is where that corner is executed. So to our right of this trench then would be those two sets of columns continuing on here. One of them right into the face of that building there, and then continuing to the left here somewhere. I'm now across the street from this square, the town hall square, because I want to show a statue. Can't read the Greek, so I don't know what the statue's of, but could be Hadrian with his beard. Don't really know.